Welcome to Common Mansplaining, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. Christian, welcome back. How's it going?
Great.
Sweet. All right. We got a fun one today, of course, and I feel like we've done this, 3 or 4, maybe even 5 or 6 times. But it just, one of the big things about this is that of late we've gotten so many comments that want to discuss this particular issue, and there've been a couple of new developments that I want to go over too, and how they affect the terrain. But we're going to talk about Israel and Palestine, and this is not a new event. It's not a new occurrence. This is, right, a big shot.
I'm not surprised.
Right. This has been going on for roughly 3,000 years. Give or take. So it's not like anybody should be shocked to see this situation in action, but unfortunately, they are still going at it. It's one of the deepest tragedies of the known world, honestly. Like, really, this is something that's just a blood feud that's been going on forever. And as much as I'd like to live in the dream world where we just don't have these, where we can just finally get over our individual feuds, our individual troubles, this is unfortunately gonna keep on going for quite some time, I suspect. One thing that I want to do before we get started is to give everybody just a brief disclaimer about war. Warfare is a horrific scenario. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, a deep, deep tragedy, and it's heart-wrenching, it's gut-wrenching, it will tear the social fabric of humankind apart. There's literally basically no person that's ever gone into active duty combat that hasn't come out with PTSD. It's just like a terrible experience for even watching it from afar. So if you are of the type of the ilk that doesn't like to see or hear about kind of like unsettling events, this is probably not the episode for you. We'll miss you, but I do want to give you that trigger warning in advance.
Yeah, industrialized warfare, especially. I mean, Sherman, right at the dawn, sort of what, war is hell, and he conducted it that way. And modern warfare is still very much a part of that. That truth has not changed.
Yeah, has not changed. Absolutely. All right. So yes, Israel versus Palestine. This is like I said, it's been going on for a long time. Kimball, how you doing? Welcome aboard. And there's a lot of big issues to consider here, from everything from like, should this be a 2-state solution, a 1-state solution? How did it begin? What happened? Who's more morally righteous, or who's got, the justification on their side? Who does the international community support? Does might make right? And, on and on and on. Right. So we're going to talk about a lot of those things. One of the things that I'd like to ask of the audience is we're gonna talk about some of the more recent developments, but as you come across comments, questions, fire them away, and we're gonna try to get to them. Hey, Vicky, how's it going? And we'll try to get to everything as well as we can. And if you feel like buying us a soft drink along the way, wouldn't hurt. So let's talk about the newest development, which is that Trump has officially declared a humanitarian crisis, which again is not a big shot, right? Everybody knew that this was in fact, I think wars are always a humanitarian crisis. Like, I don't know of a war that was ever not one. Do you know of a war that was not one? Like,
I guess battles out at sea can be battles that are just between sailors, and doesn't involve the civilians as much. But
that's fair. But
I was reading actually today, the Battle of Tsushima Island, the most one-sided naval engagement in history. But so very few common people were affected by that.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. But basically anytime, especially in this situation, because it's so densely populated, it's a very small zone, right? So there's basically no way, even if Hamas didn't try to embed themselves amongst the population, this would still be a horrific scene, right? There's just no way to avoid civilian casualties. There's no way to prosecute food distribution centers very well, and to keep the combatants and civilians separate. Is just impossible. So yes, of course, this is a humanitarian.
Yeah. Yeah, urban warfare too. Yeah, you don't just have,
Yeah.
here's the battlefield, all right, and here's where you go and sleep at night and then go back to the battlefield.
Right. Unfortunately, and so of course Trump has declared this a humanitarian crisis. He's going to send Witkoff and Huckabee over to inspect the food distribution centers. One of the like the claims that I'm hearing, although it's unsubstantiated, is that that people are just like opening fire on people as they come up to the food distribution centers, like people are just getting mowed down, which
No, there's violence, but yeah, mowed down, yeah, makes you think of a World War I entrenched machine gunner waving down waves of,
right.
yeah.
Right.
So,
And again,
so
right.
yeah,
That's part of the game, right? It's like the words used are like
yeah,
they're out there to paint a certain picture, right? It's like it almost conjures like, Nazis like pulling people out of the back of a truck, and lining them up. You know what I mean? It's like it's
yeah.
not. I don't think that that's what is meant, but of course, we should address it anyway. And there's another aspect to this that I really want to talk about, and that is
Yeah.
when people have these assumptions, right? Like where the only information you have is that somebody's getting shot at and they're at a food distribution center, right? The immediate assumption that I get from most people is that this is like the Israeli Defense Forces just like executing people like murder style. And I'm like, here's the problem I have with that, right? In the back of your mind, like I just want people to follow this exercise anytime you hear anything from media ever. Who really stands to gain, right, from a certain action? Because I can guarantee you that the Israeli Defense Forces as a whole have nothing to gain from executing somebody at a televised, media inspected food distribution center, right? That just doesn't make. Now, that isn't to say that it's impossible, right? There's always the possibility of somebody like personally doing something, lunatic wise, right? Like somebody can go off the rocker at any time, especially during war. There's always going to be individual parties on both sides that are like not doing what their government wants them to do, but what their own individual actions are, right? But in this case, it's like it just doesn't make any sense to assume that with everybody watching, with the amount of scrutiny on this thing, that Israel would just like at a food distribution center that they set up, by the way.
Well, yeah. So the new distribution centers are essentially U.S. agents, but being protected by Israeli Defense Forces. But the U.S. are running them,
right?
But and they're set up throughout, central, south, north Gaza, but in a way that they don't want to allow Hamas to control aid that came in the way UN did it, where Hamas could just take whole food trucks, take them to their warehouses, and then they're in control of distributing it. So, so these aid distribution centers rather also represent America, American power, Israel, Israeli power, right, as well as food, and so obviously they'd be targets for any type of violence for what they symbolize, right? We think of them, right, sitting here, they're just, hey, that's where people go to get food. Why would you be violent towards them if they're giving you food? But that's the one representation of your enemy or who you're most angry at. Now let's declare our biases here. Eddie and I tend to be more conservative. I am a Republican, and it's very hard to find Republicans who don't take Israel's side in this conflict.
Very true.
Right? One of the reasons that's kept this so much, and so many of our followers or people who've come on this channel and keep bringing it up and want to keep staying in, is that this is a big issue for the Democratic Party and the left, and it's sort of tearing apart their coalition. Because within the Democrat Party, there's sides that are very strongly supportive of Israel, and others that are not, shall we say? Very
true.
Now, we also want to talk about why does this matter to the common man? Right, this is a regional conflict. We're sitting over here in the United States. Should our opinions matter? Right. Well, I mean, we should try to understand, and this is a historical event. We should understand that. But how can our understanding of this and our support affect it? And that. So that's why that's how we want to approach it when we're discussing it. So one of the developments also, so Mike Huckabee has landed there. He is inspecting those food sites. He has gone there. And a few things have come out recently too. So several European nations have decided they want to start recognizing a Palestinian state.
Right.
Keir Starmer, Canada, France, a few others. But to go along with this, 22 Arab countries have signed their name on openly saying they want Hamas to give up their weapons and be not a part of governing Gaza.
Right.
So that this Palestinian state solution has a chance. Right. All 27 European Union countries signed it as well. You know, that Hamas, their recognition of a Palestinian state is contingent upon Hamas not being a part of that government and de-weaponizing, giving up the hostages, all of that. Essentially a surrender. It's what the terms that Israel said: surrender, de-weaponizes Hamas. You don't get to govern anymore. You're done. And then maybe we can talk about if you want to live in peace next to us, right?
So that's historically. This is historically how wars ended back in the day, right? Like it's just.
Hamas has the power to end this conflict by surrendering, right? And 22 Arab nations have now come out, right, in the last day, signing a thing where even when they have constituencies within their countries that very strongly support the Palestinians and support violence against Israel, it's a bold stand for them. They want to normalize relations towards Israel, and they think this is the way to do it. So Hamas is now getting pressure from other Muslim countries in the region. So it's not just us in America, guys like us who are trying to pressure Hamas with our rhetoric,
right?
But it's identifying that the regional players have looked at this, and they see that they don't want to have Hamas as a government that they have to deal with, right? Hamas is not legitimate. Right. They can't excuse any of Hamas's actions on October 7th. And they're continuing activities with hostages or to put their citizens through such brutal treatment and not surrender is beyond the pale for every other Arab nation would have capitulated at this point, and they want Hamas to as well.
Right. And I'll just go ahead and say my piece on this too. I don't understand these days. It's like back in the days, you could win a war, right? It used to be, wars happened, they were terrible, and it was always the case. But you used to be able to actually declare victory by either achieving all of your objectives, right, or eliminating all combatants, or they surrender, right? Those are the three conditions upon which wars typically ended, unless you were lucky enough to have enough leverage to sue for peace, right? To get some sort of ceasefire going. But nowadays, it's not like that. Ever since World War II, basically, it's gotten to the point where there's this grand international community, and they're all trying to make everybody say, all right, you all did good. We'll just call this a draw. You get a ribbon, and everybody can go home happy. That's just not. I don't feel like that's. I don't think that's reasonable, right? I don't understand why. And one of the things that I keep hearing is these words like proportioned, prosecution of war, proportioned offense, proportioned death, proportioned this, proportioned response. And I'm like, that's not how wars are fought. Wars, I was in the military.
Yeah.
And I just want to get this out real quick. I was in the military, and that's not how wars are fought. Wars are fought by declaring an objective and achieving that objective or failing to. That's it. You don't just to give people this quick analogy, if your kids were kidnapped, would you be worried about what it took to accomplish the objective of recovering your children? No. You do what you have to do to get the job done. It's not like, oh, well, they only killed one of my family members, so I'll only kill one of their family members to try to get my son back. No, you do whatever it takes to get your son back, to get your daughter back, to get those people home and safe. That's just my rant.
Well, and I agree with you. But Israel, I think the big thing, Israel has a long track record of proportional response, right?
Right.
Even with Iran, right? They didn't go to war with Iran. They targeted with the U.S. help, right? We didn't go to war with Iran. objective things where Iran had crossed lines, internet, and violated nuclear treaties. That's what we did. There have been times like Lebanon has launched rockets and Israel go in and will shut down those military sites. They haven't declared war. What Hamas did on October 7th was rightly interpreted as a declaration of war. They didn't just lob a few rockets at Israel. They didn't just shoot or, from within Gaza, try to, enact some violence from within Gaza. They left en masse out and took civilian populations and some soldiers hostage, in great numbers, in a declaration of war. And that's what Israel interpreted and told them, you're declaring war, we are formally. So they formally went to the Congress. This was not like a security operation or proportional response. We are now at war with Hamas, and we will prosecute this till Hamas is either no more or there's a surrender.
Right.
And so this is now not the rules of a proportion conflict over a specific. This is a war that Hamas chose violence as the means to settle their disputes. Israel is now agreeing to those terms. If Hamas wants the violence to end, they have to surrender.
That's it. So now, all right, what are your thoughts on France and the UK and Canada, right? These are like the usual suspects, right? Like they're all saying now that they've just up and declared Palestine a state, and I just can't help but sense the irony that it was France and the UK that started this whole mess in the beginning by declaring the Palestinian state at that time, which was, I believe the partition was drawn up in 1947, although there were various permutations. But so here's the same group, right? Like these are the guys who started this nonsense, and we're like, all right, we're going to make a two-state solution. It's going to be Israel and Palestine, right? And then, Israel was like, well, we don't really want to do this, but we'll do it, right? And Palestine was like, no, we're not going to accept this two-state solution. We're going to fight, right? And so, of course, and Palestine has been fighting that game ever since, right? Like, and I don't understand now that they tried this and it failed, and they tried it again and it failed, and they essentially tried it again 5 more times over the course of history, not in varying degrees, right? Like sometimes weren't really much of a chance for the Palestinians to actually accomplish a state, but sometimes they were. Sometimes, like in greater or lesser degrees. Like in 2005, again, Israel's like, look, we're out of here. Like you got your state. You do what you need to do with it. And like within hours, they were fighting again. And so I just find it ironic that the same two usual suspects that started this mess in the beginning, of course, along with Canada, which is just really an extension of Britain and France anyway, right?
Yeah.
Like, and now it's like, oh, we're going to authorize, and wouldn't you think that they would even this whole thing is about this international community trying to like preside over the whole thing. Why didn't they get up with Trump on this? Why didn't they get up with the rest of the European Union on this? Why is it like, I don't know.
Well, Trump is very, he's willing to take Israel's side to a belligerent side, right? When he, in his first term, Kushner openly said, we're not pursuing a two-state solution. We want a one-state solution. Israel governs this area, right? Yeah. They're the only legitimate government that is not corrupt. Hamas and the West Bank government was so corrupt, its leader, Abbas, resigned, right? That if you want to deal with the legitimate government, Israel's the government to deal with. There's no alternative of any type of legitimacy among the Palestinians there, right? Hamas is more violent than the other side, but the other options are just corrupt and want to enrich themselves,
right?
And with all this international aid and use propaganda, they're not really trying to govern responsibly and have a real nation.
Right.
Now, I want to respond. Kimball had some comments about how Israel's terms for surrender are unacceptable because Israel will retain its right to violence or military and deprive Palestinians of the right to defend themselves. right?
Not at all.
So, yeah, surrenders have always involved, when the South surrendered, those soldiers said, do you think they got to take their guns home with them?
Right.
No, you surrendered your gun. And that's an important sort of signal of your humility, your acceptance of the surrender is giving up your weapons. We know you can get weapons again. Like, it's not like you give up a gun, you can't ever own a gun or take a gun the rest of your life. But it is important that you give up your guns when you're
Throw your
accepting
hands
a
in the air,
surrender.
you know?
And part of the thing, let's look back on October 7th. One of the reasons why Hamas's activity was so successful when they got so far in Israel is that Israel was actually withdrawing their violence and supervision of Gaza.
Yep.
Right? There had been a terrorist attack by Lebanon and Iran, and Hamas, and they had both wanted Hamas to also start agitating at the same time, and Hamas didn't.
Yep.
And Israel looked at that at that time. This was that Hamas, okay, maybe they're going to focus on just governing and keeping the peace and keeping the electricity going and for the people of Gaza. Maybe they're ready to transition and being a political and a legitimate authority. And their response to that was to treat them like an adult. Okay, you're acting like that. So the bases that are near Gaza, right, were completely destaffed. There was like one person there to keep the lights on, to keep it from burning down. But there was nobody there in any weapons to stop what they did. That's why they were able to drive their tractors out and get so far, because Israel's bases were basically abandoned because they had decided to trust Hamas wasn't going to attack them. Right? As long as we don't provoke Hamas, right? That was the thing. As long as we don't provoke Hamas, so there'd been no provocation, there'd been no warnings, there'd been no Hamas asking for anything, right? It had been like, oh, everything's good. But Hamas saw a weakness, like Israel's leniency to them, by Israel withdrawing their violence or their oppression, and took advantage of it. And Israel basically said, as long as Hamas is in the picture, that's not going to be allowed, right?
Yeah.
And Hamas, or Palestine, Gaza especially, is going to have to build up that trust over years. Whatever new government takes over that's not Palestinian, that's not Hamas, is going to have to show for years and years that they are not interested in violence before Israel will sort of give them that sort of leniency again, because this was such a painful betrayal.
Now, how many would you say? Because this is one thing that I would push back on a little bit, because there's no real answer here, right? Like, how many years does one need to show good faith after a betrayal like this?
Well,
before
so
think it's appropriate to.
Okay, if it's a brand new organization, it's not Hamas. Now, Hamas, it might be 20 years before you trust Hamas again. But if it's a new organization, probably within 5 years, you can start like backing off, like, maybe, having 5 or so people just sort of supervising the gate or whatever. And you don't need huge bases there with guns ready to attack everything, right? Then you can back off and sort of normalize stuff. If it's a new regime, I'm talking new regime. Hamas, if Hamas stays in power, you're going to expect every base around Gaza to be fully staffed with weapons ready to go as soon as somebody gets, starts to breach any fence around that deck. They're going to be right. And so that's what they complain about. Oh, we're in this open air prison, yada yada. Israel had backed off. Israel backed off and was treated like an adult, and they proved they weren't worthy of that trust, right? Yeah. And so now they're upset that they're not being trusted or being treated like an adult by Israel, right? So obviously it is the standard of the aggressor, Israel, now to say, if you want to be a state, if you want us to treat you like an adult, you got to surrender and give up all your weapons.
Yeah, you got to show us, right? Yeah, I want to address something Prop said. Prop says, I love America. I think he said, meant to say I live in America, not Israel. So I'm not sure why I should have an opinion on what Israel does. That being said, Israel has gone far beyond an appropriate response. Killing innocent people is just wrong. So this is one of the most common remarks that you'll hear about this scenario. First of all, I would address the first part by saying that, this is just an issue that affects everybody. It affects the global politics world. And even though, you may not live there, it's just going to have ramifications that echo throughout the entire geopolitical zone, even if you don't think that it's, you know, something that is that pertinent to you personally. But like, as we're talking about, we're going to address how this affects America directly too. But it, you know, it affected, you know, UK, it affected France, it affected, you know, affects the European Union, affects all the Middle Eastern countries in the zone. It affects trade. It affects the way we manage stuff in the Red Sea. It affects, you know, like on and on and on. This is just, it's just too big. This conflict, unfortunately, the Middle East has always been kind of important just due to its geographic location, but now with its oil, it's just that much more important. And so we can't ignore this. Now, as for the second part, it is impossible to prosecute a war without killing someone that somebody would deem innocent. Right? That's just not possible. Even the limited scenarios that Christian was talking about, where it's like just a naval conflict, you're still going to end up getting injuring or damaging property of or hurting a person that someone will claim is innocent, right? And so part of this is, you know, the perception, right? So some people are going to say some people are innocent, others aren't, right? And not everybody's going to agree on who's innocent and who's a combatant. But part of it is just, you just can't prosecute war that way. Unfortunately, the best possible civilian to combatant ratio of casualties in the modern world happens to be this one. I know that's going to be a shock to some people, but like past World War II, this is effectively a 2 civilian to 1 combatant ratio of casualty, which in a population this dense in an urban combat setting, for this to be even among the top is outrageous. Like that's like way better than we could hope. But the fact that this happens to be the best one is like mind blowing. Like compared this to, you know, I mean, the only other place that was better was like Iraq, because America did it and we can just do everything surgically. But we weren't fighting in cities and stuff like that. We were like 50,000 feet up with, you know, strikes that we could manage anytime we want. We had total air dominance. We had no problems with, nobody was firing rockets at us. Nobody, you know, there's no question about our dominion in the area, right? But this is the best civilian to combatant ratio that you've had in like 30 years, 40 years or something like that. Now, I'm not saying that means it's yay, you know, we killed innocent civilians. I'm not saying that. Like, it's always terrible. It is always heartbreaking. But that doesn't mean that you can do it otherwise. There's no alternative, right? Again, the game isn't proportion response. The game isn't appropriate response. The game is fulfill the objective. That's war. And the objectives, just so we're clear, and I think the stats and the situation, this out, Israel's objectives are recover the hostages, protect their own people, get rid of Hamas, who is a constant and an unending threat, right? So like those are the objectives. And if they could achieve those 3 objectives with less civilian casualty, they would. And I challenge you to tell me exactly how to achieve those 3 objectives without these casualties, because I can't come up with it. And tactics and strategy was my strong suit in the military.
Yeah. Well, Hamas right now, they know they cannot defeat, this is clear, they cannot defeat Israel militarily. They've accepted that. Their only path to victory is through propaganda and international pressure, right? So that's why they don't wear their uniforms when there's a military, so that they can be identified as military targets, right? Anybody killed is wearing civilian clothes, so it's called a civilian, right? And they're full-on propaganda machine. Now, many on the left in this country are fully taken in by that. Whatever Palestinians say, you know, is truth. There was a video put out by Hamas that showed this very sickly looking child, right? This is a child starving in Gaza. It was very clear after editing, or you know, when you saw a full picture of the video, standing next to his very well-fed brother. This was a person who had a lot of health issues even from before October 7th, right?
Yeah,
That led to his issues. Right. And the New York Times, who'd run fully, as soon as this came out, had run fully, trumpeting this, finally, a few days later, quietly offered a retraction that they were misled and that this child's health was not related to the starvation, yada, yada. Now, I'm not saying that there's not food problems or, that Gazans get to order appetizers as much as they would like to or anything like that, right? So obviously, in a war, food rationing or any type of food things are going to be scarce. The way to mitigate that, if you cannot bear that, right? This is what a siege is, right? Yeah. If you don't want a siege, you surrender, right? That's what sieges have been in our historical, and how sieges end. It was either the army outside got fed up and couldn't supply themselves anymore, that they starved, or the people inside starved. Right.
Or died of disease or something else. Yeah, that was the best case scenario, right? Like, or they would siege warfare is terrible. By the way, again, war is terrible in general, but siege warfare is like a nightmare, right? And the fact that I don't. This is where it gets complicated, right? Because like if you look back in history, right, you can see situations where people would resist a siege, but the only reason to resist a siege is if you were part of a larger nation and the consequences for not resisting were worse, right? That's the only reason you would do that, right? Or if you thought you had a legitimate chance of winning, that was why you would resist a siege, because your castle defenses were superior and your stockpiles were superior. That's why you would resist. You would resist because you were part of a defensive strategy and you were like one castle in 30 and you were the linchpin of the campaign if you could just hold out for 3 more months. That's why you would resist. But if you were just one lone keep and somebody came up to lay siege to you and you couldn't withstand that siege, you immediately surrendered. There was no like, I'm just going to be resistant and see if I can win a propaganda victory no, absolutely not, because the best you could hope for was starving to death, and starving to death is not a fun way to go. Like that is and this is why I can't write one of the things, and I'm not saying that that the Gazans don't have a right to survive. I'm not saying that they don't have a right to resist when oppression gets bad. I'm not saying all those things. But what I am saying is there's an obvious disconnect here between, and we need to talk about this too real quick. There's a huge difference between governmental action and individual action, right? And so, like, if you were to judge the Israeli Defense Forces by the actions of like one idiot or lunatic who does something crazy, because I guarantee you there's some racist in the IDF, right? I guarantee there's racists in the Hamas forces, right? But if one idiot goes off and does something stupid, which I don't have many reports of despite my research, but even so, if that happened, you can't pin that on the IDF simply because there's like one person doing something dumb. That's on that guy. Now, if the government tells them to do stuff that's bad, then that's the government, right? And right now, the Israeli Defense Forces are telling their troops to give out food to all of the civilians that they have separated from the combatants in the south, right? They're telling their troops, put out leaflets and do roof knockers and make phone calls so that they can clear out civilian populations before dropping bombs. They're telling their troops, there's just so many steps that they have taken to try to protect life that you can't possibly assume that the Israeli Defense Forces goal is genocide. You just can't. It's just not logically possible.
Yeah. Well, it would be easier and cheaper for them to do genocide.
Yeah.
Right.
They got 2 million people in Israel right now that are Arab Muslims. They could start right there, but they don't because they're not trying to. They could glass. This is the thing, I've said this a million times, guys, but I just want you to hear it again. And I'm not saying this to be flippant. Israel could turn Gaza into a lake tomorrow. They could turn them into a lake tomorrow. It would be Lake Gaza, Gulf of Gaza. It would just be one solid sheet of glass. But they don't. Why? Because they're not trying to. because that's not their goal, because their goal is not genocide. Their goal is to protect as much human life as possible while still achieving those three objectives.
Yeah. Now, and this is also, there are a lot of people who say, I don't care about politics. This is why politics matters at the utmost, is if your government makes stupid decisions, it will affect you. Now, look,
yes.
We're living in America, right? Raleigh makes a stupid decision, and maybe our water's worse, or we have problems where, you know, our electricity becomes unreliable or something like that. The implications here is Gaza chose, elected, and had their chosen government acted foolishly, made a bad mistake, right? And that has brought negative consequences to the population. And you can't separate politics, right? These are the people who represent your country. If you don't want them representing your country, you need to rise up and overthrow them. And if the Gazans are willing to overthrow Hamas, I know there's more and more people who are trying to come forward and say that they, Gazans, that say they support Hamas or don't support Hamas, that they're against Hamas. If they can act on that, right? And if they're willing, right, put some action behind it. Don't just say to the cameras, "Oh, I hate Hamas," but action behind it. Then then they're involved in politics. If they want a good government that represents them and their interests, that's the way forward, right?
Yep.
Politics at the end of the day will end up getting, your life destroyed in a conflict if it's prosecuted poorly. So you want somebody who's for peace. If you're for peace, Hamas is not for peace. Supporting Hamas means you are not for peace. If you support Hamas, you are not for peace, and you need to accept violence until you are.
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, and at large, historically, the Arab Muslims in the area haven't been for peace ever since the inception of the Israeli state. Unfortunately, now I'm not saying that that's every civilian. You know, there's definitely going to be isolated pockets, and there's going to be situations where, like of late, thankfully, the Arab states around them have regularized like commerce.
They want to live with Israel now.
Absolutely. And you know, and I mean, everybody wins if that happens, right? Like Saudi Arabia proved this. Like their commerce is like through the roof now. Like everybody wins if they all can just get along. And the easiest way for that to happen, once again, is for Hamas to surrender. And I'm not saying that, because, you know, between Christian and I, we have a mild dispute. He thinks probably a one-state solution is better. I think it's maybe logistically better, but I think that a two-state solution would be more fair, right? Even though I acknowledge that a one-state solution is probably like the best for all individual people as a one-on-one relationship.
Well,
like I think
the two-state solution, you have to have a government that's legitimate. There's just not one there.
Yeah.
Right. The West Bank has nobody after their governments gave up, right, because of their corruption, nobody stepped up. So it's not like, all right, who are we going to give statehood to? Like, there's nobody that wants to take that football, right? And Gaza is just Hamas. It's like, we can't have a two-state solution. You can't recognize a state until there's a legitimate politics that people have to be involved in creating a politics that's not corrupt. If you just have a government that's not corrupt, you can prosper and live in peace. And the Muslim states, enough people in the Middle East have been educated in the West and come back to the Middle East to know that they can live in peace with us. We don't want to dominate or conquer their countries. We just want them to not attack us anymore. That's all Israel wants, right?
Right.
Just stop being attacked. It's not a long list.
Yeah. So Prop says that where there's violence, there's religion. I would have to push back against that. I think violence is a human trait, brother. I think that I can find you plenty of non-religious wars. I can find you plenty of religious or wars that involve religion or adjacent to it, at least, like, you know, crusades or Islamic conquest. But there's plenty that don't, right? I think this just honestly, I would say where there's land, there's violence. Like I think probably. Yeah, like right, or scarcity, right? Like there's land. Anytime there's like a land dispute, you know, that's probably the biggest one, I would guess, is territory, or fighting over, you know, scarce resources. so you get more territory for that purpose or something like that. It's probably, but yeah. Anyway, but yeah, ESPNC. I would also say, it's easy for everyone to just equate this to like saying, yeah, why don't you just give up? Why should everybody should just roll over and surrender? But the problem is they started it, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily say, stop fighting for what you believe in if you were the defender. But if you start it, right, if you like walk up to the bully of the school and punch him in the face, and then the bully starts beating you up, I'm like, at some point, that's when you would say, all right, look, all right, I give up. You're right. I shouldn't have hit you. My bad. Like it'd be one thing if they were on the defense, but they're not. They're absolutely the aggressors in this situation, and they have been from the beginning, right? Like, let me take you a quick stroll down memory lane, right? Like 1947 rolls around, and the UN, sets up this partition, right? They give it two-state solution. Let's remember, right, that both sides had a state, and Israel's like, well, I don't really like this, but we'll accept it. And all the Arab states around there were like, no, we need to fight. And so they immediately, like within hours, started attacking people, started like slaughtering people, started rioting in the streets, started attacking, Jewish villages, started slaughtering people in buses and stuff like that immediately. Right. And so that civil war lasts a couple of months. And then Israel's like, all right, well, now that Britain and France are gone and the partition's been allocated anyway, we'll just go ahead and, take our section. And that's like, that was like a sign for every single nation around them to attack them, still without provocation.
Yeah. Every time that Arabs have used violence against Israel has been the wrong decision. That I can agree on, right? Everybody that decries violence, every time it's been on, and they've lost territory because of it. Israel's had to take more territory because they can't trust them. For their own security, right? They attack them, they lose more. The only reason Israel controls Gaza is because they were attacked violently, right? If Egypt had just, accepted that Israel was a legit country, Gaza wouldn't be under Israeli control, right?
So, all right. So ESPN said this is a great comment to segue into the next section, right? So ESPNC says when UN stole land, right? Now, there's a couple of things that I want to address here. Number one, I don't completely disagree that the UN messed up this whole thing. Don't completely disagree. Now, the other side of this coin, though, is I want to talk about when it's okay to acquire land, right? From a moral position, right? One way that it's okay to acquire land from my standpoint, anyway, my moral framework is if you buy it, right? Because I believe in property rights. I'm okay with purchasing. By the way, a great amount of the land that the Jews owned is because they purchased it in like 80,000 acre lots from like this Suruk family or something like that. Some Jewish oligarch, right? Another way that it's okay to acquire land, again, in my moral framework, is if you earn it by defending yourself, not by aggressing, but by defending yourself. So if you're sitting around doing nothing and someone else attacks you and you conquer territory as part of your defense, that's yours. End of story. That's how I feel. Now, in this situation where you say that UN stole land, did they steal it or did they earn it by defending it against the Nazis who the Arabs in the area had allied with? Right? Because don't forget that, right? They joined up with Hitler to fight against the European Union. The Europeans at the time, the Axis, they fought against the Allies, right? And so they lost this land, and then that's why the UN gets to partition it up, because they lost it while they were aggressing on others. Once again, by the way, like this is maybe if I go back and look at my sheet, and I did a ton of research on this, I would guess that in the last 100 years, they aggressed without provocation at least 8 times. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like when they lose land because of that, tough shit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's legitimate. It's Israel's right now. When you go back anciently, right? Rome was the last empire that really ruled that area. They called it Judea until emperor got kind of aggravated at them and changed them to Palestine. Right? Now, Palestine, the Arabs never called that area Palestine.
Yeah, nobody.
Right? there's no word, there's no sound in Arabic for the p sound, right? Right. So it was never Palestine for them. For them saying Palestine, it was never Arab. But then after Islam in the 6th and 7th centuries, they conquered took control of that, and then the Crusades conquered it again, brought it back until the Ottomans conquered it, and the Ottomans controlled it until World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Right.
Yep.
So the rights to this land, the Arab right to this land, is the right of conquest, and right. Israel has a right to defend, has those same rights as well. Right. They have a historical right that it was called Judea. There's archaeological evidence of that. It's in the historical record. They've now legitimized themselves, right? And to such a degree that 22 Arab nations are now ready to normalize. Part of the drive why Hamas timed their attack when it did was because Saudi Arabia was about to send an ambassador to Israel, recognize Israel, and set that up. And this was all done to make it untenable for them to do that. The Arab nations are finally saying, we're not going to let Hamas block us from doing that. They're going to move forward with that, even in spite of the horrific propaganda that Hamas is saying about this conflict. The Middle Easterners say, that doesn't matter. You brought that upon yourself. Israel's here. They're not going anywhere. It's time we normalize the relationship with them and had an embassy.
Right. And, like every single time I will say that I truly do feel bad for the Gazans in that every single time they reject an offer for peace or for to set up a 2-state solution or to set up some kind of ceasefire, every single time they reject one, the next time that they're in that spot, they're basically forced to accept a worse one, which they then also reject because their position keeps on declining, right? Every time. And I mean, this is just common sense. If you keep fighting against a superior force and you keep starting the fight, your situation is just going to decline, right? I mean, obviously, America and Mexico are on semi-congenial terms, but if Mexico decided to attack the United States for no reason, Mexico could expect their situation to decline rapidly, right? That's just how it is. I mean, I'm sorry. And now I want to do this. I want to spend some time acknowledging what Israel does wrong. Okay, because they do things wrong, and I don't want people to come away from this thinking that I'm just here to carry water for Israel, because they're not.
We are not. It's not. We're not saying Israel is perfect at all, or that they're without criticism. 100%.
So here's my gripe with Israel. Right, Israel obviously has become disgruntled over time, and obviously does not care as much for peace as I would like them to. Right now, they maybe did originally. Maybe they were down to settle, but over 6 wars over the last 70 years, they've gotten. It's obvious that people like Netanyahu and that faction are if we get peace, great, and if not, great. He's definitely at that point, and I hate that. Right, I wish that he could come back to. Harken back to the 1948 situation where, had they been peaceful, both sides probably would have accepted it and both sides would have prospered. Another thing that I really don't like about Israel is I hate what they're doing in the West Bank. Absolutely hate that they are encroaching in the West Bank. I think, this is my personal opinion. Again, you don't have to agree with me. I think those settlements are illegal. Basically, for those of you who aren't following, Israel's been kind of sort of slowly creeping up on the West Bank, adding little settlements here and there. And of course, the international community calls that illegal because it's, you're not allowed to add settlements to occupied land. And of course, Israel's oh, no, it's not occupied, it's disputed. I'm all right, that's just pedantic garbage.
Well, this is also a problem with there not being a legitimate government,
right,
to run anything. Now, obviously, yes, Israelis and Hebrews are treated better in Israel, but they are Arabs that want to live in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in the nation of Israel, peacefully, are allowed to do that. They're given the freedom of religion. Right, they don't have to serve in the military. They don't serve in the military, but in other ways, they recognize legally as the equivalent of a Hebrew or Jewish citizen. Right? If there was a legitimate government that was doing services, that was setting things up in the West Bank, governing things, well, that would be one thing, but they're not. And so they're going, okay, we need electricity, we need services here. This land is being laid fallow. We have people that want to use this. I think it's really damning that the Palestinian Authority can't get in the West Bank, where there's not violence, where there's not this, cannot just have somebody stand up who's not corrupt and try to be like, look, we're going to try to take this and legitimately govern it so that you don't have to feel like you have to come in and do these settlements. Again, I can't defend them 100%, but it is also your situation where there's no alternative, right? You can't turn over a government to anyone else. You need a civic authority of something to turn to.
Yeah, Kimball. So these are good questions, Kimball. Who defines a legitimate government, and who defines what a terror attack is? And I think
the common man, the
common man, right?
That's why so many people tune in, so that they can hear our definitions. Yeah.
Right. We should just, give the UN our dossier on what. Well, no, to be fair though, like a lot of these really are relatively common sense questions. Like I don't think I have to go to Oxford to figure out what a terrorist attack is, right? Like we all kind of know what that is, right? I mean, anytime that someone's attacking others for the purpose of inflicting terror, usually without provocation, right? I think this is generic stuff. And again, right, like legitimate government.
Yeah.
I think legitimate government would have to follow.
Being educated is one thing that helps you determine propaganda from a true two-sided situation. Anyway, go on.
But anyway, but that's this is basically generic stuff. The international community does have some guiding bodies that are supposed to, dictate some of this for us. But the truth is, I don't know that I agree with a lot of them. Like, for example, the Geneva Convention has this. As I was looking over this, one of the things that they discuss in the Geneva Convention is proportionality, right? There's a proportionality rule of war. But again, war doesn't work like that. And here's the best part. When I look in the Geneva Convention for like the rule, like the calculation, I'm sitting there because they say, like, for example, even if you achieve a military target, you can't, you don't take that target out if there's a quote unquote unacceptable loss of civilian life. I'm like, okay, great. What's that acceptable loss, right? Like, what's that ratio? What's the calculation? And they say, oh no, there's no actual calculation. This is all subjective after the fact. And I'm like, well, great. That's
it allows you to always criticize from afar. But is Hamas whipped out their book and their little every Hamas fighter have a little booklet of Geneva Convention things that they're following when they took civilian hostages? No, the Geneva Convention, right, is not something that terrorists are prepared to. That's the thing. When you're dealing with legitimate governments, right, fighting each other, you can sort of, expect Geneva Convention stuff. When it's a terrorist, illegitimate, religious, fatwa jihad organization that just hates the idea of a Jewish state, right? Regardless of anything, will never accept it ideologically. Geneva Convention things are an unrealistic standard because they're not going to follow them at all.
Right. And right. So like, for example, they're talking about, proportionality in like World War II, for example. Yeah, there's definitely times where we were just like abysmal, right? Like the nuclear strikes were those weren't necessary. Now, did they save lives in the long run? I don't know. I've seen stats both ways, but the truth is, like, things like the Dresden firebombing, that's terrible. Like, you don't want to, some of these things where, get out of hand. But that being said, the reason that I don't think those things were acceptable was because they weren't to solve an objective, right? Like the Dresden firebombing wasn't like, oh, we're going to do this just to like accomplish this military target or this military target. When we drop nuclear bombs, the only reason we're doing them is because we want to shock and awe everyone into submission. That's not a military objective, right? And so the same thing can be applied here, though.
Right. I'll push back on that because ending wars is a political thing. Starting wars and ending wars is a political thing. Generals in charge generally of prosecuting. But Japan, by dropping those bombs, it humbled not just the military leaders that controlled Japan's politics at the time, but also the emperor, right? Japan is an interesting case. I've been studying, right? Everywhere in Asia up to that they'd been looking. I'm sorry if we're pivoting a little bit to Japan here, but everywhere in Asia, the model was Chinese culture, and that everybody was building up to Chinese culture.
Mm-hmm.
When Japan interacted with Western culture, right? They were like, well, this is very different. They just didn't look down on it as barbarism. They sent people to Europe, to the Americas, and they studied it, and they realized that it was more advanced. And they decided to U-turn, not keep following Chinese culture, but to Westernize.
More advanced technologically.
1869, right? But not just to take their technology to Westernize their institutions or governments, end feudalism, have elementary schools, their architecture, their dress, right? Western dress, all their institutions, the judicial system, all these things are right to unlock the potential of the populace. They recognize the superiority of Western culture, right? And that's why they became the world power in Asia. But when those bombs showed that they were still not right. The West was still ahead of them. And here it was important. They were going to continue to fight to the death until their emperor, who they revere, made huge signs of humility and acceptance, and that gave them so that they could be a humbled superpower. They could rebuild. We had a little bit of insurgency, but not for very long. It wasn't like Iraq or other places or Afghanistan. They were humbled, and they allowed us to rebuild and become a great peaceful nation. So I don't disagree. I think in hindsight, it's very easy for us to look back and criticize those actions. But at the time, there was a lot of justification in them, and they had an effect that blessed the Japanese people, right? In that being humbled allowed them to get to a place where they could be built back up and thrive.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and to an extent, right? Like I'm not a believer in the ends justifies the means, but that having been said, the ends obviously here was probably more positive than otherwise, right? But it's one of those things where you're never going to have perfection in work.
But this is I think the path forward for me as a common man in Gaza is that they have to be truly humbled, almost to the degree that Japan was, Japan had to accept the United States is legitimate. They are now our overlords. We will not fight them anymore, and whatever they say goes, right?
Yeah.
And that's and then what they saw is the Americans were interested in building them back up and them just being a peaceful country, right?
Yeah, so
they prospered, right? And that's what we want in Palestine too. Hamas, if they would just trust Israel and the West, be humble and not try to kill us, we can build them up and they could live prosperously in peace.
Yeah, so I'm not sure which part of the assessment you're talking about, Kimball, but yeah, I mean, there's parts of this where I think that the Japanese culture has become largely friendly with America. Of course, they perform a lot of trade with us. We still have a naval base there. We're essentially as close of allies as you can get. I mean, that's going to be our South Pacific ally against China if there's ever a conflict there. So hopefully they do think very highly of us. Now, that having been said, I don't think that the culture of holding grudges for past wars is a good one at all, right?
Yeah.
So if anyone does do that, I think that's just a terrible model anyway. So hopefully Japan does not hold that grudge. Hopefully
I have absolutely read quotes of people saying they're not angry at the atomic bomb droppings, and they see them as necessary.
This being said, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some who still do. But again, I would liken this to the situation in Gaza in that, once again, Japan was the aggressor. We were out of this war, and then out of nowhere, they attacked us, right? And so once again, after that, if you go attack somebody else without provocation, if you go attack somebody else, and this is just like essentially a moral truth, right? If you go attack somebody else without provocation, At that point, you need to accept the consequences of what happens. Go tonight into a lion's den and punch a lion in the face and see what happens. No, that's not advice, right? Like, I'm just saying, when you get to the point where you go attack somebody bigger and stronger, you should expect defeat, and you should expect defeat spectacularly. And I'm not saying that that makes the defeat like a good thing for the world, but that's just the rule of the jungle, baby. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Like, anybody who got when Gaza performed October 7th, it's like, to use a quote from Christian. I mean, do you think that Gaza was ignorant to the fact that Israel's war making capability was superior? Right? Like, do you think that they did not realize that after the aftermath of this heinous strike, that they weren't going to get dominated? Right? Nobody in the world didn't know that. Right? And so then if you do it, this is the thing. Like, if you know the consequences of your action, and then you take the action anyway, who's
accept the
responsible?
consequences.
Right? Who's responsible for those results? I mean, that's all there is to it. Now, again, that isn't me saying that Israel has no blame or no wrong, right? Nobody's perfect. And I just detailed a couple of key areas where I would like Israel to do better. And there are others, by the way. Like, I could go on, but that having been said, if you know the consequences of your action are to get destroyed. And by the way, one of the problems with this is Hamas does have a huge disconnect from its population. Like, even though they did that poll or whatever that said like 80% of Gazans were in favor of the October 7th strike, which is like a mind-blowing number, by the way. Like, that's an insane number. Like, I would have hoped for 10%, like, and then accepted 20%. But when I saw 80, I'm like, whoa. So like 80% of the people are happy at this terrorist attack. That's insane. And then, right, so if you've got a Hamas over here in Qatar living like kings and they don't care what happens to their people, I don't understand how they maintain sway. I mean, it has to be through fear. That's the only thing I can think of. But anyway, I mean, we could talk about this for another 3 centuries.
Yeah. And I think Japan is the good model. I know we've talked about that. There are people, historians especially, who say what we don't realize, people from the outside or people from the left, is how much the military controlled and dominated Japanese government, right? And was doing things that maybe the people didn't want, right? This is sort of what Hamas is doing. All they're seeing thing is through the eyes of a military. But how after those bombs dropped, the military industrial or military leadership who was dominating Japan stepped aside, gave up power, and a peaceful civilian, right, government was able to come and lead Japan. That's all we want in Gaza. We want civilians. We don't want a militant organization, because the militant organization has proven themselves with this attack to be unfit to govern Palestine.
Yep. Hey, so I want to address one thing that Drew Wilhite said maybe Israel shouldn't have stolen land. Now, one thing I did want to touch on is what's commonly known as the Nakba, right? I don't know how many people know about this incident. The Nakba is a reference to the displacement of Palestinians from Israeli land right around the time of the Israeli independence, right? It's talking about the Nakba, and it's about the displacement and the suffering, right, from that civil strife and from that war that soon followed thereafter. Now, I want everyone to go look this up when you get a chance, and look this up. Check this information for yourself, because it did a lot of research, and every single person basically that felt that was displaced from their land during that time fell into one of 3 categories. Either they had to leave because of the war that the Arabs started, right? Like, either because they were like occupying a strategic zone that that Israelis need to conquer to maintain their own strategic value in their land, of the war that had already started, once again, that the Arabs were the aggressors in. They left because of economic strife. They chose to leave because of economic strife, or they were told to leave by local and regional Arab states, like local and regional Arab authorities, basically said, get out because we're about to attack, right? There is not, I could not find a single report that was substantiated of like some random Israelis like saying, you know what, just get off the land, you know, just leave. There was no stealing of land there. So
I agree.
understand.
I agree. But you know, it's easy from 1,000 feet for people to buy into propaganda. The propaganda right now. This is what common mansplaining is about. It's to help you see through the spin propaganda. Don't be taken in. This is Hamas's only path to victory is propaganda. Is in getting right. They don't have logistics to supply themselves. Right. They rely on the UN to resupply them. Right. It's crazy, right? And when we shut that off, they cry, "Oh, this is humanitarian crisis." Well, no, it's a military logistical crisis that they don't have the logistics to continue to wage a siege war. They need to give up, right? And we need to see through. We don't need to be taken in by their propaganda. They're liars, right? And they don't care about the lives of their citizens, and they certainly don't care about the lives of peaceful Israelis or peaceful Americans.
That's a shame. It is a true shame. And like I said, the war is always going to be a heartbreak. So, guys, that's all we got for you this week. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. We do this every Wednesday and Saturday. We'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.
Thanks. Keep coming.
Keep coming.